Okay, and welcome to a quick tutorial for helicopter gunship D.E.X. I'm Jim from Jimmy Arcade, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at how we fly the helicopters, how we use the autopilot modes to reduce our workload when flying the helicopters, and also we're going to take a very quick look at the control settings menu so I can explain how you rebind your controls and possibly explain why some people are having some issues not getting the control settings that they want. So I'll have a look at that now. So I have added a little debug message or screen at the top of the control settings now that tells you what joysticks the game can actually see. Next to each one is a string of numbers, and these indicate your raw inputs from the various axes on that controller. So if I give the left thumbstick a quick waggle on my Xbox One pad, you can see that's reflected there. Now ideally, when I let go of all the controls, the readings should all be 0. It won't be on some pads because they do suffer from a little bit of joystick drift. Same with Flight 6, you might end up not having a quite centered flight stick depending on how strong your springs are, or if you're even using springs with your stick. So anything that's over 0.1 or 0.2 is probably in danger of being seen as the input you want to bind to when you try and rebind. So I think that's the main thing really, is people are getting the wrong axes because an axis is being seen that is not the right axis because it's already sending an input. Main culprits for this are like throttle controls, where you don't have a spring to center it. So if it's not fully centered, it will be sending a command to the game, and the game will see it if it's over a certain value. So try and keep them to 0.1 or 0.2 at the very most, preferably 0, to prevent that from happening. However, there are a few things you can do to get round it. So we'll talk about the keys first of all. Keys pretty straightforward. You have a primary button and a secondary button or alternative button that you can bind to. To bind, you just click on the button. It'll pop up and ask you which one, to press the button you want to bind to. If you want to clear it, click on it, press escape. It will go back to none. We do have a extra option over the side which allows you to force a joystick button in. You shouldn't need to actually use it in most cases. You should, if you want to bind a joystick button, again just click here, press your button, it should pick it up. However, some HOTAS systems and some joysticks have toggle buttons which constantly send an input to the game, and this is if you're getting a case where you get like joystick 1 button 9 over and over again, even though you know you're pressing button 0, it's probably because that button is sending a command to the game continuously. So to get around that, I mean, there's nothing I can do to sort that on a control. Some controls, that's how they are designed. So instead you have a drop down list here which will show all the controls available and all the buttons available. You just select the button you want to bind, then click the set primary or set alternative, and it will drop it in for you. There's a lot more buttons that you can bind to now, so you have all important things like launching flares, locking the targeting pod, cycling the pod zoom, all these things that you would need when you want to set up a HOTAS system and don't want to go through the screen of interest or modify button system. So you can do that now. Setting up axes. Pretty straightforward really. You've got two ways of really binding your desired axis. You can click the auto detect button and then give your axis a waggle. You will need to move it positive and negative for it to pick it up. Just doing it in one direction doesn't always work, so give it a waggle in both directions. Alternatively, you can select your axis from the drop down list. We actually support 4 joysticks up to 20 axes each. So have a look at to know what joystick you're looking at. Have a look up here. You'll have joystick 1, 2, 3, 4 if you have that many connected, and that corresponds directly to this here. So if I wanted to bind the X-axis on my joypad, then it is joystick 1. Other settings, you have a sensitivity setting. Generally, always leave it at 1. Lowering it means the helicopters will be a lot more sluggish. Might be useful if you're learning, but you may find that the controls don't respond fast enough if you have the sensitivity low. Conversely, you can increase the sensitivity, which means there'll be a lot sharper controls, but what you're basically doing is moving the maximum value of your axis further to the center, so that can have adverse effects if you dial in a lot of that. Sometimes it's useful to have that function if your joystick is failing and it's old and it doesn't read its maximum values anymore, so that allows you to tweak that. Dead zone, all important. The game comes with dead zones at 0. You may want to set that up to 0.1, maybe even 0.2, depending on your preference. It obviously means the values close to the joypad or the axis are not read. So if you're finding that your helicopter is constantly pulling to the left or right or up and down or twisting, then increase your dead zone for that control, and you might find that that clears it up and sorts it. These are all general flight sim issues. Invert axis, usual standard thing. If you find that you're trying to turn left and your helicopter goes right, then invert the axis and that should fix that problem. Alright, key axes. These are allow you to bind keys as a joystick axis. Is anybody mad enough to play this game on a keyboard? Probably. I'm only joking. Yeah, it is possible to do it. This is where you can do it. You have a positive axis, negative axis, so that's in terms of like the collective, that's more power, less power. Sensitivity and dead zone don't really do anything. Well, they don't do anything at all for these things, but the invert axis definitely does. You can switch them around if you want to, but you could potentially just rebind them the opposite way around as well. So that's the control system. If you can remove bindings, key bindings, always remove it by clicking it and then pressing escape. Joystick axis bindings, just choose none from the drop down. That's the way it works. Okay, let's get up flying some helicopters. So we're going to look at using the autopilots, but first of all I'm just going to show you something. Now this is how sensitive the helicopters are. I'm sat here on the pad and I'm just going to give my collective a little bit of a waggle. It's only a small movement, and you can see that my helicopter's bouncing around. Now that is a challenge for control pad users because my collective, because it's on the left stick and the left stick always centres, that means it's at 50% power constantly. If I pull my stick down to 0 and now waggle the stick, you can see it's much more stable. It's hardly moving at all. And that's purely because the collective is, trying to lift the helicopter at 50% power. It's not enough to lift the helicopter entirely, but it is enough to lighten it to make it somewhat unstable on the ground. It's not such an issue once you've got weapons loaded, but if you are testing and not loading weapons, then be aware that the helicopter is much more sensitive to things like that. If your helicopter is pulling left and right or twisting or anything like that while it's sat on the pad, you need to look at your dead zone settings, increase those so that the helicopter is not getting any input when it shouldn't be getting any input. Right, with that said, your helicopter should be on the pad and stable like this. That is how it should be played. If it's not, there is something wrong and you need to look at your controls. So, with that said, let's get up into the air. So I'm going to do this by turning on the autopilots, which on the gamepad is the left stick click. So I'm going to do that twice, turning on hover hold and altitude hold. I now lose cyclic control completely. I can waggle that stick, nothing happens. That's because the hover holder is now taking over control of the cyclic. Now I do have limited collective control, but I'm not actually directly using the collective on the helicopter when I'm in altitude hold mode, because all I'm doing with the collective is dialing in the target altitude that I want the helicopter to be at. I'm not actually directly influencing the collective itself. So if I push up on the stick on the collective now, we'll actually see the number underneath the altitude hold on the right hand side of the HUD increasing. So 25, 30, we're going to set it to 40. and let go. And the helicopter is now going to rise up and gain altitude. I'm not doing anything, I'm not telling it to do this other than that I've dialed in what I want the altitude to be on the altitude hold. The altitude hold computer is actually now lifting the helicopter up to the desired altitude, and once it reaches that, it will then back off the collective and bring us to a stable height. And as you can see, I'm now in a very stable hover. The helicopter's in no danger of crashing. Everything is nice and safe. So if I want to go down, I push the collective down to dial in a new number. Let's go to 30. So I take my finger off the collective, and now the helicopter will move to 30 meters above the ground. And that is how the altitude hold works. You are not actually controlling the collective at all. You are actually just influencing the number or target altitude that the altitude hold autopilot will actually try and maintain. So let's go back up to 40 because that's a good height for flying. So again, we'll just wait to reach that altitude. My fingers aren't on the collective, I'm not touching anything. The autopilot's doing all the controls for me. So at that altitude now, we can now click the left thumbstick, turn the hover hold off. We are now into altitude hold, so I now have cyclic control again, and I can push the nose forward and we'll actually start to transition into forward flight. Now, we don't need to touch the collective. The altitude hold will adjust the collective for us to maintain our target altitude. I'm only using quite gentle inputs on the controls. These helicopters are very manoeuvrable, they are very sensitive, so any light touches on the controls. And you can see that we're now moving forward quite nicely, and I'm just controlling the helicopter, really just keeping it level with the left and right on the cyclic, and just making sure my nose doesn't dip or raise too much by pushing up and down on the cyclic as well. But I'm not touching the collective at all. And you can see now we're moving forward and the altitude hold is doing its job and keeping us at the right altitude by manipulating the collective for us. And I can start to bank round, and the altitude will keep us roughly at 40 meters. Now, it is terrain following altitude as well, so the undulations and bumps and dips and rises in the ground, these are all being calculated out, and the autopilot will take the necessary action to keep us at the right altitude. And you can see the helicopters are very smooth, they're quite well behaved, and it is quite easy to fly around at this kind of speed just using the cyclic. Now if I want to start to pick up some real speed and start pushing the nose down a lot, you'll see that now the altitude hold is having trouble. Now it can't maintain our target altitude because we are pushing down too much, and there simply is not enough lift being generated by the rotor blades to keep us at that altitude, and we're actually trading altitude for speed. So the altitude hold is not infallible. At high speeds, you do still need to fly the helicopter, but at low speeds you can work on other systems while you're flying along, so targeting pods, that kind of thing, they all are really easy to use while you're flying along. And we can do that now. We can switch to the targeting pod and we can scan the horizon for things, switch mode, zoom in. Oh, there's a tree, we'll lock onto that tree. We can do that all while staying in the altitude hold mode, knowing that mostly we're not going to fly into the ground. As long as I keep an eye on things, it's fine. We can just keep looking, making sure we're not going to crash into anything like a mountain or anything, and it's quite well behaved. We can put some rounds on target, look over to the next tree, put some rounds on that one. Really, really easy to do. Reset our pod back to forwards, and we can just circle around. And if we want to bring it back to the hover, we just level up, bring our nose up, and the altitude hold will do its best to now adjust the collective to keep us at 40. And we'll slow down. Again, not touching the collective at all. And now that we're below 20 knots, we can switch on hover hold, and that'll bring us back to a stationary, stable hover. Now while in hover hold, we do have tail rotor control, so we can start to spin around. And I'm just going to have a look on the map, see where our base is. So I'm going to spin this around so we're facing there, and we'll fly back. Now you have to be quite gentle when doing the tail rotor, because the tail rotor does induce instabilities in the helicopter. The hover hold pilot will do its best to keep those under control, but heavy movements can destabilise the hover hold a little bit. So gentle controls again. Once we're ready to go, we click off hover hold, push the nose down, transition to forward flight. Now, full disclosure, I do fly radio controlled helicopters, so flying helicopters like this is second nature to me, really. If you're not used to flying helicopters, then keep at it. You will get there. They are not easy things to control. They are slippy, they are slidey, they tend to do weird things when you're least expecting it. Fortunately, this game doesn't model things like blade stall or ring vortexes, so you're safe on that front. We do model ground effect, so it can get bumpy closer to the ground, and you'll probably see that when we're coming for a landing, that we'll get a bit of a bounce as we get close to the ground. This is not a dumbed down physics model. This is real physics flight model for a helicopter, or as close as I can get it at the moment anyway. So even though this game is for pad controllers, it is a fairly realistic flight model. This is not Jungle Strike or anything like that. So we're just going to head back to base, and then we're going to use the altitude hold autopilots to actually land us. Now, before we do that, I'm going to switch into full on manual mode. So to click off the altitude hold, it is left, modifier 1 and left stick again on the control pad. There is a button to turn off autopilots in the control setting completely, so you can bind that on your HOTAS if you want. And now we're really tanking along, and I can just keep the collective pushed all the way up, and I will just fly it by adjusting the nose of the aircraft up and down to keep our altitude fairly stable. This is a good way to fly if you really want to fly fast, but you have to be really conscious of where you're going, and if obstructions and things like that in front of you. The helicopters themselves are really manoeuvrable. I mean, you can really throw these things around. These are combat aircraft, so they can really be chucked around. They are fully aerobatic as well, as the Apache is in real life. If we do a bit of a zoom climb, get up some altitude, we can barrel roll it quite easily. We can loop as well. I won't in this particular video, but it can be done, as the Apache can do in real life. But for now, we'll bring the helicopter down, line up for a landing. We'll use that road as a bit of a guide. So we'll start to swing it around, kicking in some collective now to really spin us. Kill the drift. There we go. And then we'll toggle in altitude hold. So 35 is pretty good. That'll do. We'll keep our speed managed. We don't want to go too much over 20 knots actually, because we want to be able to use that wonderful hover hold to really make landing dead easy. So I'm going to bring it down to 30 now as we're getting a bit close to the pad. 16 knots, 15 knots, that'll do nicely. Once we're getting about over the pad, which is probably about there, kicking the hover hold. And now we're going to use the collective just to dial in 15 and let the helicopter bring us down. Okay, we're not too far off the pad. We're going to come down to 10 now. Probably going to start to get a little bit of bumpiness from the ground effect. There we go, a little bit of a bump there. Oh yeah. We're a little bit off the pad, so we're going to turn off hover hold, go into altitude hold, and then as we just drift over, put the hover hold back on, and that will slow us down nicely. And then I think we're pretty much near the centre there. We're just going to bring the altitude down in little stages. Okay, we're a little bit off there. but that'll do for this example. And we'll just see that. There we go, that's ground effect for you. And down. And there we go. Oh, tail wheel's just off, but never mind, it's good enough. There we go. So you can see there how easy it is to fly the helicopters using just a gamepad and the autopilot systems. And you can see how well the helicopters actually fly in manual mode as well. So I'm hoping that was informative and maybe will help some people get the best out of this game. As I say, this is not a dumbed down game, particularly in terms of flying a helicopter. The controls are complicated because they are complex machines and you are dealing with complex devices and systems. And I didn't want to dumb any of that down just because people want to play with a control pad. So there we go. I hope that was interesting, and I hope you'll join me again for the next tutorial.